Okay, so we all know that the Resident Evil remakes, Silent Hill, Alan Wake, Dead Space and Little Nightmares etc. are great horror games. You don't need me to tell you that, you've seen them. So how about a bit of retro fun and a few games you might never have played or even heard of? And yes, that does include one of the most disturbing games I've ever played. Stay tuned. Let's start with something brand new and what is hopefully just the beginning of a fantastic new series of horror games. RetroRealms is the umbrella title for what are in fact two separate games based on the classic horror film Halloween and the recent Ash vs Evil Dead TV series. Whichever game you pick first, and you can buy them separately or as a bundle with the two DLC characters, you'll be ploughing through one of the most pleasingly adult action platformers I've played in a while. I opted to take Michael Myers for a spin first, and I was immediately smiling from ear to ear as I began to chop through the fellow inmates and staff in the Smith's Grove Sanitarium. The pixel art and animation are brilliant, with a detailed sense of place that every Halloween fan will appreciate, including some subtle Easter eggs you'll notice more and more as you replay the levels. Keep an eye on those backgrounds. The sound of Myers' iconic knife slashing through flesh is on point, and the resulting spurts of blood that increase in volume and smear your screen as you speed through attacks took me back to the best levels in Splatterhouse. I particularly like how most enemies aren't the punishment sponges they are in so many other modern games, and you can take down a lot of the basic grunts with one satisfying hit. The bosses are also very well thought out and nicely varied, and I'd say they generally fall on the easier side of the fence across both games, especially early on. There are no difficulty levels in the game, so I found the relatively gentle increase in challenge very welcome. As things do get tougher, you can even the odds in the mid-level shop, where you can spend any currency you found across the levels on extra hit points, secondary ammo and some new moves amongst other things, and again this applies to both games. Adding an extra layer of fun and complexity is the Nightmare Realm, an alternative reality version of each and every level that you can trigger with the tap of a button, and you can remain there for as long as you have power in the self-generating meter that governs the ability. Here you'll find the more twisted, horrific enemies and the answer to some puzzles, as certain walls get removed or platforms added, allowing you to access secrets and power-ups. Ash vs Evil Dead plays in a very similar fashion to Halloween, except that instead of a puny little knife, you'll be carving through the deadites with your chainsaw and taking heads off with the occasional charged blast from your boomstick. Health pickups are now elaborate pink cocktails, and there's plenty of smart mouthing as you bounce through some excellent recreations of just about everywhere from the films and TV series. One of the key twists with this package, apart from the fact that you get two games for the price of, well, two, is the ability to play any character in either of the games. You can live out your 80s fantasy as Michael Myers silently shredding the minions of hell, or as Ash quipping as he whips the head off a succession of weirdos in the nut house. Although my 80s fantasy was actually more to do with Daryl Hannah in the movie Splash with Tom Hanks, but that's a different game entirely. The two DLC characters, Laurie Strode and Kelly Maxwell, also from Halloween and Ash vs Evil Dead respectively, have their own weapons and moves, in addition to unique story elements and trophies or achievements. I've certainly enjoyed going back through the games with all four characters, but I'd be remiss if I didn't mention one caveat, which I'm hoping the developer can address with a patch or two. It's less noticeable with Ash, but there are slight problems with the other three characters, and particularly Michael Myers and Laurie, when it comes to input lag. In part this is down to the animation the developers have implemented, with both Myers and Laurie having something of a backswing with their weapons before they reach out to connect with an enemy. The problem is eased as you progress and buy extra strikes for your combo in the shop, and I recommend you do that as quickly as possible, but some of the jumping on and off platforms is also a frame or two behind where it needs to be, and that could use some attention. In the meantime, let me be clear that a few controller quibbles won't prevent any action platformer fan getting a lot of fun out of this package, whether you know anything about the films and TV series or not. I'm excited to see how this series expands, and the developer has confirmed that they're holding the keys to several other horror franchises, so we could find ourselves with annual releases if these first two games do well enough. Imagine if we got to play through the cinematic worlds for other childhood troubling characters like Freddy Krueger, Pennywise, Chucky and Barney the Dinosaur. I look forward to filling my virtual museum with a lot more exhibits in the months and years ahead. But if you prefer your horror to be more Tim Burton than Sam Raimi, then you might like the next game on this list. You can't have Halloween without Tim Burton, and you can't have Tim Burton without Halloween. Not that Pumpkin Jack is in any way directly based on any of the famous director's work, but it's clearly heavily inspired by it all the same. I've really enjoyed bouncing through this game. It's not trying to be Dark Souls with vegetables, it isn't 7,000 hours long, and your 5-year-old can't accidentally spend $1,000 on microtransactions. If you've been missing those simpler days of 3D platforming on the PS2, you are going to feel right at home with Pumpkin Jack. There's actually quite a decent tongue-in-cheek story at play here. The devil has decided to liven up the perfectly happy but mundane Boredom Kingdom and has hit it with a curse. To make sure no one undoes his fun, the devil resurrects a spirit of a criminal and trickster to cause some havoc on his behalf, and that's you. There is some quippy story text to get through every now and again, but some of it's quite funny, it's never too lengthy and it doesn't interrupt the overall flow of the levels. From the moment you start playing, you'll appreciate the animation, controls and a solid frame rate. Even the camera, so often a problem in 3D platformers, up to and including some of the best Mario games, is very well behaved, focusing where you need it with very little player adjustment. You have a basic combo attack, which varies depending on which weapon you're holding at the time, and you have a jump and slam maneuver, which looks flashy and does a fair amount of damage to multiple enemies. You also have your trusty sidekick, a crow, who'll spring from his perch on your head and strike enemies at a distance when you want him to. Combat feels fine, but it can be a bit haphazard and it's almost impossible not to get hit in a battle with a group unless you stand well back and fire your crow at the enemies. You'll need to smash open plenty of boxes and barrels to keep your health topped up in a lot of the skirmishes, but that's as much a tactic as anything else in a fight and really not a problem. Starting with a basic shovel, each new instrument of death is acquired from defeating a boss and includes swords, scythes and even a gun. You can swap between weapons on the fly, but generally I found whatever I'd been given most recently to be the most effective and powerful tool, and I didn't feel the need to go back to any earlier weapons. There's an enjoyable variety in the level design, with set pieces like escaping a burning building, runaway minecarts and riding a spectral horse breaking up the traditional run and jump gameplay. I like the amount of verticality in a lot of the levels, and there are even segues where you unscrew your own head and send it into a confined puzzle arena. As with the rest of the game, none of this is particularly taxing, but it's a welcome change of pace that staves off monotony. Aside from the main story, there are 20 glowing masks in each area to find and trade with a merchant for new outfits, which are purely cosmetic. There's no need to worry about finding a ton of crap in this game and then trying to fathom a convoluted skill tree. Pumpkin Jack offers very little if anything that's original, and I don't care. Certain ideas and sections get reused a fair bit to pad out the experience, but I found all those sections to be fun, and the variety across the roughly 5-hour runtime is impressive for an indie. The game's usual retail price is £25 or $30, which certainly stops it becoming an impulse purchase for many. Limited run games have just announced physical copies of the game for the PS5 and Switch for £35 or $40, which might make the cost more palatable for serious collectors. For everyone else, the digital game regularly drops to just over a £5, especially around Halloween, so keep your eyes open for that. And now for something really weird. Tamashii translates from Japanese as soul or spirit. The game should also feature a subtitle, Kusohodo Bukimida, which means creepy as f***. It might not look it at first, but trust me when I say this develops into one of the most disturbing 2D platformers ever. As an unnamed soul, you've been tasked by an ancient entity to flush an evil out of a twisted temple. The juxtaposition of quite basic, almost cutesy graphics set against the hideous soundscape and a conveyor belt of squelching, Geiger-esque monstrosities really lends an unease and an intrigue that keeps you glued to the screen, just like all the best horror films. But before we get entirely lost down the rabbit hole, let's stop and take a look at what we're actually playing here. Tamashii is a 2D puzzle platformer with a style and sound design largely closest to the 8-bit generation. From your central hub in the temple, you'll access several doors leading to the various levels, each filled with platforming challenges, traps and mechanisms that need to be activated by depositing up to 3 static clones of yourself in certain positions. These clones are effectively weights for keeping down switches to open doors and remove walls, and they all disappear after a set amount of time, making for some frantic platforming that requires careful planning. The sheer variety of ways in which the developer has implemented the puzzles is extremely impressive, and just about all of them leave you with that rush of achievement once you've figured out the solution. Fortunately for a game that relies so heavily on timing and speed, the character movement and control is excellent. The jumps are particularly well executed, with longer or shorter distances covered intuitively depending on how long you hold the button down for, which is crucial for avoiding the numerous one-hit kill traps. But if you do die, or rather when you die, you'll only be sent back to the beginning of your current puzzle room or boss encounter. Towards the end of every level, you'll get a choice between an easier or harder ending to proceedings, with successful completion of the latter granting you access to locked levels found in the temple. It's definitely worth trying both variants of each level because the bosses alone are often worth the price of admission. Everything suddenly becomes a lot more colourful when you meet these end-of-level guardians, and you might just pause for the first couple of attempts to marvel at what you're up against. All the while you'll be playing against an unsettling soundtrack, which sometimes features screaming babies amongst other blood-curdling vocal work and sound effects. Indeed, the game will look to shock you at random and regular intervals, including screeching jump scares, even when all you're doing is traversing the hub to a new level. I got a gold trophy for accidentally discovering this poor tortured bastard, and if you choose to look it up, you'll often find there's a real-world religious or mythological reference for each encounter. It's a short game at around 4 hours or so for the average player, but as long as you have patience with one or two of the trickier platforming sections, Tamashii will trick and treat you to a unique experience. But if this is all getting a bit much, how about some light relief with some old friends in our next game?
Better late than never, right?
It's a great time to play Ghostbusters Spirits Unleashed. In the 2 years since its very quiet and frankly disappointing release, the game has seen a number of tweaks made to gameplay, controls and abilities, in addition to adding crossplay, new maps and ghosts, all of which is culminated with the Ecto edition that brings it all together. If you're a PS Plus Extra subscriber, the game has just become free to play at the time of recording, and it's pretty cheap on every format these days anyway. Beginning in the iconic firehouse, you've got to try this pole. You begin a modern day story featuring both the voices and the cartoon likenesses of Dan Aykroyd and Ernie Hudson. No Bill Murray sadly, and of course we're missing the great Harold Ramis, who left us far too early. Both Venkman and Spengler are name-checked throughout the story though, which is a nice touch. In short, ghosts are once again scaring the living piss out of people in more than 10 different locations, and as part of a new group of rookie busters, it's up to you to round them all up. The basic premise in Spirits Unleashed is simple: 4 Ghostbusters versus 1 ghost. As the busters, you must find and destroy 3 rifts, which act as respawn points for the ghosts and reveal themselves when you blast open certain objects, usually gargoyles or creepy dolls. Once all 3 are gone, you must then trap the ghost one final time to win. As the ghost, you need to haunt the entire building, which involves terrifying members of the public and possessing inanimate objects, which often sends them dancing comically around the room like something out of Fantasia. You can attack the busters and slime them to slow them down, move the objects in which your rifts are hidden, or send out minions that will confuse PKE readings as you continue to cause trouble elsewhere in the building. Closing rifts and tethering ghosts isn't easy with your base kit. You'll need to accrue some XP to upgrade your proton pack, trap and PKE meter in particular if you want to pinpoint and hold the ghost before time runs out. Helping you to power up more quickly are a huge variety of on or offline challenges that ask you to trap or become some famous ghosts, in addition to extra XP you'll earn for collecting spores, molds and fungus throughout each level and progressing the main story. And do stop by your locker every now and again to make sure you're looking your best when meeting your adoring public. Or dress up like a complete tit, it's up to you. Of course, when all is said and done, you're only ever really playing the one game mode in Spirits Unleashed. I don't think anyone was expecting a team deathmatch where you burn each other's faces off with particle accelerators, although I would play that, but maybe a mode that featured more ghosts, or no rifts and just captures, or one where you have to avoid getting slimed a certain number of times. There are a lot of ideas out there, and I can only think that licensing stipulations may be holding the creativity back a bit. Playing alone with bots against the AI is actually a lot more fun than I was expecting, and perfect if you just want a quick game or something. And you'll be pleased to know that there are trophies and achievements for just causing out and out damage. But the game really comes alive if you can put together a private party of 5, taking turns to be the ghost and the busters across the various maps. If you're looking to immerse yourself in a great Ghostbusters story, then I'd recommend you try Ghostbusters the video game, which even after 15 years is still a decent single player adventure, featuring the voice talents of all 4 of the original cast. But if you're going online with your team and you want a break from all the usual Call of Duty crap for 5 minutes, give this a go for a few rounds.
Show yourself!
There are some fantastic independent arcade games coming out of Brazil, and the wider South American region for that matter, and we've got another winner here in Savage Halloween. This 8-bit inspired run and gunner is packed full of variety with some inventive weapons, bosses, and a challenge that's pitched extremely well for those of us who enjoy a test, but not one so tough that you'll be kicking pumpkins up the wall every 5 minutes. From the off you have the choice of 3 player characters, a pumpkin-headed scarecrow, a werewolf and a vampire, each with their own stats for health, speed and damage output, although I only really found speed to be of any difference between the 3 while I was playing. Each of the characters begins the game with the same machine gun type base weapon, and you'll quickly supplement this with some inventive ammo-limited projectiles like giant flying frogs, exploding chickens and ghosts that'll whiz around you for a set number of seconds, damaging anything they come into contact with. All of the weapons have their uses, and it's easy to switch between them on the fly. The controls as you negotiate platforms, ladders and obstacles are highly responsive and predictable, and being able to shoot from ladders and in 8 directions from a standstill is very welcome. Mixing up the standard platforming levels are, amongst other things, a scrolling shooter section, riding a penguin and racing a lit fuse to its dynamite before the whole level blows up. As with Pumpkin Jack, Savage Halloween doesn't really do a single thing that experienced gamers won't have seen in a platformer somewhere before, but everywhere you look you can see a developer that just wanted you to have some fun, all topped off with an excellent soundtrack, 2-player co-op and a hard mode for extra challenge and replayability. The game cost me less than £2 during a recent PS Store sale. It will cost you no more than £4 or $5 at full price. If you enjoy a good retro platformer, give this a go. There's always a certain amount of nervousness when you go back to a childhood favourite game. Am I about to find out that all my memories are bollocks? Zombies Ate My Neighbours and its sequel Ghoul Patrol were re-released for modern systems as a double package in 2021, and while what we have here is a bare bones offering that won't do anything to win over younger gamers or those who simply weren't interested the first time around, for fans who no longer own their 16-bit machines, this is a great way to revisit the games. In Zombies Ate My Neighbours you play as either Zeke or his sister Julie, or both, running around 48 levels trying to save all of your neighbours before they're attacked and eaten by the zombies. The more you save, the higher your score, and when everyone's rescued or dead, the exit to the next level will appear. It's a simple addictive premise, made even better by the huge amount of variety on offer. 1 minute you're walking the streets, then frantically searching a shopping centre before exploring a pyramid, a castle, or being stomped by a 40-foot baby in your own back garden. The challenge is tough but not insurmountable, especially with the new save states, which I would have killed for in the 90s. After the success of Zombies Ate My Neighbours, the development team at a certain LucasArts released the sequel Ghoul Patrol the following year. This was back when a development studio could release 2 games in the same lifetime, a notion that will of course seem ridiculous to most young gamers today who are used to seeing $500 million budgets and studios close within 10 seconds of their first game being released. The first thing you notice in Ghoul Patrol is the more detailed graphics and animation, followed almost immediately by how much harder it is. Zeke and Julie are now all grown up and have left their water pistols behind, opting instead for a far more adult arsenal including crossbows and machine guns. Both characters also now have dashes and jumps to help them over or past obstacles more easily or avoid danger. There's a new counter at the top of the screen to tell you how many people are left to save, in addition to speech bubbles that float at you from the terrified neighbours, helping to identify where they are in a level, replacing the mini-map from the first game. In truth, I'm not sure I like this extra layer of hand-holding, which seems to diminish some of the "aha, I found you" satisfaction from the previous game. But again, with all the variety in the levels, weapons and bosses, you can't help but keep ploughing on, and those save states are a massive bonus. During another recent PS Store sale, this double pack cost me less than £3. That's not even $5 or €5. If you're looking for a satisfying nostalgia hit, something that actually stands up well today, this is definitely an option worth considering. So, what are your favourite horror throwbacks? Have you unearthed a modern game that you need to tell everyone about, or have you gone back to something from years ago that's aged surprisingly well? Let us know in the comments section below, and please leave me a like if you wouldn't mind. I'll be back very soon with a lot more games and recommendations. Cheers for now.